The mountain swallowed the sound of the explosion before Callan Zimmerman could even reach the mine entrance. And when he arrived at the collapsed shaft, 14 families were already gathered in the rain, their faces twisted with the kind of grief that comes before certainty. He pushed through the crowd with his tool belt still rattling from the sprint up the hill, his hands already assessing the rubble blocking the tunnel mouth, his mind calculating angles and weight distribution, while mothers screamed and fathers stood silent as stones. The foreman grabbed his arm, rain streaming down both their faces, and said what Callan already knew. The support beams had failed 200 feet down, the main shaft was completely blocked, and nobody had heard anything from the trapped miners in over an hour. Callan knelt in the mud and pressed his ear against a gap between two massive boulders, listening past the sound of his own thundering heartbeat, past the wailing behind him, past the drumming rain. Nothing. He stood and wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of rock dust across his cheek. "Get me 4 strong backs and every timber in the supply shed," he said to the foreman. "And send someone to town for more rope. Heavy rope, not that thin stuff you use for hauling ore." "The chief engineer said it is not safe," the foreman replied, his voice hollow. "He said the whole mountain could come down if we disturbed the wrong stone." Callan looked at the man, really looked at him and saw the fear there, not fear for the miners, fear of responsibility, fear of making the wrong choice. "Then the chief engineer can explain to these families why he left their people to suffocate in the dark," Callan said quietly. "I am going in. You can help or you can get out of my way." The foreman stepped aside. It took 3 hours to create a gap wide enough for a man to crawl through. Callan worked with controlled precision, identifying which stones were structural and which could be safely moved, placing support beams as he went, creating a tunnel within the collapsed tunnel. His shoulders scraped against rough stone. His hands bled from a dozen small cuts. Behind him, volunteers passed out debris in a human chain while others hammered new supports into place. The air grew thicker the deeper he went, heavy with rock dust and the mineral smell of the mountain's interior. When he finally broke through into the main shaft, his lantern revealed a scene from a nightmare. The tunnel had collapsed in a cascade, creating a cavern of unstable rubble that groaned and shifted with every movement. 14 miners were trapped beyond the fall, assuming they had survived the initial collapse. Callan crawled forward carefully, testing each foothold, each handhold, speaking constantly to the volunteers behind him to describe what he was seeing, what he was doing, creating a verbal map that others could follow. "There is a secondary collapse about 20 feet ahead," he called back. "I can hear water running. The support structure on the north side is completely gone. I need more timber." They passed him beams one at a time through the narrow crawl space. He worked by feel as much as sight, his mason's hands reading the stone like a language, understanding where pressure wanted to flow, where weight was gathering, where the mountain was holding its breath before the next fall. He had spent 15 years working stone, first as an apprentice in the southern quarries, then as a journeyman mason in the capital, finally as a master stonemason here on the frontier where new mines opened every season, and men needed someone who understood how to keep the earth from crushing them. The first miner he found was dead, crushed beneath a support beam that had snapped like kindling. The second was unconscious but breathing, trapped by fallen rock that pinned his legs. Callan worked for 40 minutes to free him, moving stone by stone, never rushing, never pulling when he should lift, never lifting when he should shift. When the man was free, Callan dragged him back through the crawl space and passed him to waiting hands, then immediately returned into the darkness. He found 5 more miners alive in a pocket of relatively stable ground where the collapse had formed a natural arch. They were dusty and terrified, but uninjured. He marked the route for them with chalk on the walls and sent them crawling toward safety while he continued deeper. The air was worse here, thick enough to make his lungs work for every breath. His lantern flame burned low and blue. Somewhere ahead, if any remained alive, were 7 more miners. The tunnel curved and Callan had to squeeze through a gap barely wider than his shoulders, the mountain pressing against his ribs, stone scraping his back and chest simultaneously. For one terrible moment he was stuck, unable to move forward or back, and he understood with perfect clarity why some men feared enclosed spaces. Then he exhaled completely and pulled with his arms and slid through into a larger passage. That was where he found the orc girl. She was crouched against the far wall of a small chamber created by the collapse, her green skin dark with rock dust, her clothes torn and bloodied. 2 human miners lay near her, both unconscious. She had dragged them into this space, had positioned them as safely as possible given the circumstances. And now she watched Callan with eyes that showed white all around the amber irises. Her tusks were small, barely more than prominent canines, but they were visible as she breathed in short, sharp gasps. She could not have been more than 20 years old. "I am Callan," he said quietly, keeping his hands visible, keeping his body language calm despite his racing heart. "I am a stonemason. I am here to get you out." She said nothing, just stared at him like a trapped animal trying to decide whether to fight or flee. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Still nothing. Her hands were clenched into fists. There was blood on her knuckles, more blood streaked across her forearm. He could not tell if it was hers or belonged to one of the miners she had protected. Callan looked at the 2 unconscious men. One had a head wound that had bled considerably, but seemed to have stopped. The other's breathing was labored and wet-sounding. Broken ribs, probably, maybe a punctured lung. Both needed to get out immediately. "I need to take them first," he said to the orc girl. "The tunnel I made is narrow. I can only take one person at a time, but I will come back for you. I promise I will come back." Her eyes narrowed slightly. She did not believe him. Why would she? He was human, she was orc, and every story on both sides was about betrayal and violence between their peoples. "I give you my word as a mason," Callan said, and put his hand over his heart in the old gesture that meant his craft and honor were bound together. "I will come back for you, but these men will die if I do not get them out now." Something shifted in her expression. Not trust exactly, but perhaps recognition of necessity. She gave a single sharp nod. Callan dragged the first man back through the tunnel system, passed him to the volunteers, then immediately returned for the second despite the agony in his shoulders and the way his hands had gone numb from gripping stone. The air was even worse now, the lantern flame a bare flicker. When he delivered the second miner to safety, the foreman tried to stop him from going back in. "The shaft is not stable," the foreman said. "We have had 2 more small collapses in the last hour. You need to wait for the engineers to assess the situation." "There are still people down there," Callan said flatly. "How many?" Callan thought of the orc girl crouched in the dark, surrounded by stone and fear and the corpses of men she had tried to save. "Enough," he said, and crawled back into the mountain. He found 4 more miners on his return trip, trapped in a side passage he had missed before. All were alive, though one had a badly broken arm. He got them moving toward the exit, showing them the chalk marks, making sure they understood the route. Then he continued deeper to where the orc girl waited. She was still in the same position, still pressed against the wall, but her eyes tracked his movement with something that might have been hope. Callan's lantern chose that moment to gutter and die, plunging them into absolute darkness. He heard her sharp intake of breath. "It is all right," he said into the black. "I know the way by touch. I need you to take my hand." Silence. He could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. "I know you have no reason to trust me," Callan said. "I am a human and you are an orc and we are supposed to be enemies. But I am also a stonemason who gave his word, and I have never broken an oath to stone or to any living person. Take my hand. Let me get you out of here." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he felt her fingers brush against his, tentative as a bird landing. He closed his hand around hers gently, feeling the different shape of her palm, the calluses that spoke of hard labor, the trembling she could not quite control. "My name is Callan Zimmerman," he said. "What is yours?" A pause, then so quietly he almost missed it. "Vasha." "All right, Vasha, stay close to me. The tunnel is narrow and we will be crawling for most of it. If I stop moving, do not panic. It means I am checking the stability. If I tell you to move backward, move immediately. You understand?" "Yes." Her voice was deeper than he expected, with a rough edge that was not quite human. He filed that observation away and focused on the more immediate problem of navigating 200 feet of unstable tunnel in complete darkness with an orc girl who was probably on the edge of panic. They crawled. Callan moved by memory and touch, his hands finding the chalk marks he had left, his body remembering the curves and narrows of the path. Vasha followed close behind him, so close he could feel the heat of her body and hear every ragged breath she took. Twice they had to stop when small showers of pebbles rained down from above. Once they had to backtrack when Callan felt a support beam that had shifted since his last pass. The air grew marginally better as they progressed toward the entrance, but it was still thick and dead, the kind of air that made every breath a conscious effort. "Why were you down here?" Callan asked as they crawled, partly to keep her focused, partly because he genuinely wanted to know. Orcs did not usually work in human minds. Vasha was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then, "I haul ore, cheaper than horses, stronger." He heard the bitter edge in those words, of course. An orc could do the work of 2 men and the mine owners would pay her a fraction of human wages if they paid her at all. And if something went wrong, well, who would complain about a dead orc? "When the collapse happened," Callan said, "you pulled those miners to safety." "Yes." "You could have tried to dig yourself out instead. They were hurt." Such simple words for such a profound choice. She had used her strength to save humans who probably would not have done the same for her. And when Callan arrived, she had been preparing to die in the dark, because she assumed he would take the humans and leave her behind. They reached the main crawlspace, the tunnel Callan had excavated through the initial collapse. Light from the entrance was visible ahead, gray and watery, but bright as the sun compared to the absolute darkness they had been moving through. Callan felt Vasha tense behind him. "Almost there," he said encouragingly. They crawled toward the light. Callan's knees were raw, his palms bleeding, his entire body shaking with exhaustion. Behind him, Vasha's breathing had gone harsh and gasping. Just a little farther, just a few more feet. They emerged into evening rain that felt like a blessing after the suffocating air of the collapsed mine. Hands reached to pull Callan out, and he turned immediately to help Vasha, extending his arm to her. She took it and let him pull her up into the gray daylight, and that was when the crowd saw what she was. The change was immediate and ugly. The gratitude on people's faces curdled into suspicion and anger. Someone shouted something about orcs bringing bad luck. Someone else demanded to know why she had been in the mine at all, as if she had caused the collapse somehow. Vasha hunched her shoulders and pulled away from Callan, her eyes going to the ground, her whole body language shifting into something defensive and small. "That is enough," Callan said loudly, and was surprised by the authority in his own voice. This woman saved 2 miners after the collapse. She stayed with them when she could have tried to save herself. Every person I brought out is alive because someone kept them breathing until I could reach them. So show some gratitude or keep your mouths shut. The crowd muttered but fell silent. The foreman approached, looking uncomfortable. We have all the miners accounted for now, he said. 9 alive, 5 dead. Better than we feared. Better than you deserved, Callan said tiredly. Those support beams were rotted through. I saw the wood. This collapse was not an accident, it was negligence. The foreman's face went red. You have no authority to make such judgments. I am a master stonemason. I have every authority to recognize shoddy work when I see it. Callan turned away from the man and looked for Vasha. She had moved to the edge of the crowd, clearly preparing to slip away into the forest before someone decided to blame her for the dead miners. Callan walked over to her. She watched him approach with wary eyes. Up close, in better light, he could see the extent of her injuries. Her forearm had a deep gash that needed stitching. She had bruises darkening across her collarbone and the side of her face. Rock dust was caked in her hair and on her skin. You need a healer, he said. I will manage. That cut needs cleaning at minimum, stitching most likely. I do not have coin for a healer. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, just stating a simple truth. Callan studied her for a moment. She was trying very hard to appear strong and unbothered, but he could see the way she was favoring her left side, the way her hands were shaking slightly. She had been trapped underground in the dark for hours, had thought she was going to die, and now she was standing in the rain, bleeding and alone, while the people she had saved turned their backs on her. Come with me, he said. She looked at him with open suspicion. Why? Because you are hurt and I am not going to just walk away from someone who needs help. I have a house about a mile from here. It has a fire and clean water and medical supplies. You can rest there, patch yourself up, have something to eat. Then you can leave if you want to. You do not owe me anything. I know. I am offering anyway. Vasha studied his face like she was trying to read his intentions written in his features. Whatever she saw there must have passed some internal test because she gave a short nod. All right. They walked down the mountain path together in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. The rain continued falling in steady sheets that washed some of the rock dust from their clothes and skin. Around them, the frontier forest loomed dark and dense, pine trees that grew so thick they blocked most of the fading light. This was the edge of human settlement, where the old kingdoms gave way to wilderness and unclaimed territory. Dangerous country, people said, full of bandits and wild beasts and orc clans that raided human settlements. Callan had lived here for 3 years and mostly found it peaceful. His house was small, just 3 rooms built from stone he had quarried and shaped himself. The walls were solid and straight, the roof well sealed, the chimney drawing properly. It was a craftsman's house, built with skill and attention to detail. Callan opened the door and gestured for Vasha to enter. She hesitated on the threshold, looking past him into the interior like she expected a trap. Then she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, her body tense and ready to bolt. Callan left the door open behind them so she would know she could leave any time. Sit, he said, pointing to a chair near the cold fireplace. I will get the fire started and then we can look at your arm. Vasha sat stiffly, perched on the edge of the chair as though ready to spring up at any moment. Callan busied himself with building up the fire, arranging kindling and logs with the same careful attention he brought to all his work. When flames were crackling and spreading warmth through the room, he filled a pot with water and set it to heat, then gathered his medical supplies. Clean cloth, a needle and thread, a bottle of strong alcohol that served multiple purposes. He pulled another chair close to Vasha and sat down. "Let me see your arm." She extended it slowly, watching his face. The gash was about 4 inches long, not terribly deep but dirty with rock dust and grit. It absolutely needed cleaning and probably needed stitching. Callan wet a cloth in the warming water and began carefully cleaning the wound. Vasha sat rigid, not making a sound even though he knew it had to hurt. "You can tell me if I am being too rough," he said. "You are fine." He worked in silence for a few minutes, concentrating on removing every bit of debris from the wound. Her skin was warmer than human skin, and the green had gradations he had not noticed before, darker along her forearm, lighter near her wrist. The shape of her hand was subtly different from human proportions, the fingers slightly longer, the palm broader. "This needs stitches," he said finally. "I can do it if you trust me, or we can go to the town healer in the morning." "You do it," Vasha said immediately. The implication was clear. She did not want to face more humans tonight, did not want to deal with their stares and their suspicion. Callan threaded the needle and poured alcohol over it and over the wound. This time Vasha did hiss, her jaw clenching. "Sorry," he said. "This is going to hurt. Just do it." He stitched as carefully as he knew how, making small, neat stitches that would heal well if she kept the wound clean. Vasha sat motionless through the whole process, her eyes fixed on the far wall, her breathing controlled. When he was finished, he wrapped the wound in clean cloth and tied it off. "There," he said. "That should hold. You will need to change the bandage every day and keep it clean." "Thank you." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Callan realized he was still holding her hand, having forgotten to let go after finishing the bandaging. He released her quickly and stood up. "Are you hungry? I have bread and cheese, some dried meat. Nothing fancy, but it is food. I should go." "You should eat first. You have been through an ordeal." Vasha looked at him with those amber eyes that revealed nothing. Then, quietly, "Why are you being kind to me?" It was a fair question. Kindness between humans and orcs was rare enough to be suspicious. Callan thought about how to answer while he moved to the cupboard and pulled out food. "I suppose because you were kind first," he said. "You saved those miners. You could have tried to save yourself or tried to dig out, but you stayed with them. That tells me something about who you are." "It tells you I am a fool," Vasha said bitterly. "They will not remember that I helped them. Tomorrow they will go back to seeing me as a monster. That is how humans are." Callan set bread and cheese on the table, along with 2 cups and a jug of water. "Some humans, yes, not all of us." "Enough of you." He could not argue with that. He had seen how the crowd reacted when Vasha emerged from the mine. He had heard the things they said. She was not wrong about human prejudice against her kind. "Eat," he said. "Then you can rest here tonight if you want, or I can walk you wherever you need to go. Your choice." Vasha approached the table slowly, as though expecting the offer to be withdrawn. When nothing happened, she picked up the bread and tore off a piece. She ate mechanically, refueling rather than savoring. Callan ate as well, suddenly aware of his own hunger. They had both been running on fear and adrenaline for hours, and now that the immediate crisis was over, exhaustion was setting in hard. "Where do you live?" Callan asked. "Do you have family nearby?" "I camp in the forest. I move around depending on where there is work." "You have no permanent home. Orcs do not own land in human territory. You know that." He did know that, though he had not really thought about the implications before. Vasha was essentially homeless, traveling from place to place, taking whatever work she could find, probably cheated on her wages more often than not, unable to complain because humans held all the power. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "The bed is in the other room." "I will sleep out here by the fire." "I am not taking your bed. You are injured and exhausted. I am just exhausted. I will be fine on the floor. Vasha looked like she wanted to argue but was too tired to manage it. Just for tonight, she said finally. Just for tonight, Callan agreed. He showed her to the bedroom, gave her a clean shirt to sleep in since her own clothes were torn and filthy, and left her to rest. Then he returned to the main room, banked the fire, and lay down on the floor with a blanket. His body was screaming at him, every muscle sore, his hands raw and aching. But underneath, the physical pain was something else, a feeling he could not quite name. Satisfaction, maybe, that they had saved 9 miners who would have died otherwise. Or perhaps it was the memory of Vasha's hand in his, the way she had trusted him enough to follow him through the darkness. He fell asleep still trying to figure it out. When Callan woke in the morning, the first thing he noticed was the smell of something cooking. He sat up, disoriented, his back protesting the night on hard floor. Vasha was at the stove, using his supplies to make some kind of porridge. She had cleaned herself up, washed the rock dust from her skin and hair, and changed back into her own clothes, which she must have washed and dried by the fire. The bandage on her arm was clean and white. "You did not have to cook," Callan said, standing and stretching carefully. "You gave me food and shelter. It seemed right to give something back." She ladled porridge into 2 bowls and they ate in companionable silence. The food was simple but well made, seasoned with herbs Callan did not remember having in his cupboard. She must have added something of her own. "What will you do now?" he asked when they finished eating. Vasha shrugged. "Find more work. The mine will probably shut down for repairs after the collapse, so there will be nothing there for a while. Maybe I will head east, see if any of the logging camps need help." "That is a week's walk at least." "I am used to walking." Callan thought about her traveling alone through the forest, sleeping rough, probably going hungry more often than not. The thought bothered him more than it should have for someone he had just met. "What if I offered you work here?" He heard himself say. Vasha looked at him sharply. "Doing what?" "I am a stonemason. I have contracts to build foundations for 3 new houses in the valley and to repair the bridge over Pike Creek. I could use an assistant, someone strong who does not mind heavy lifting. The work would last through the autumn at least, maybe longer if winter is mild. You do not need an assistant. You just feel sorry for me." "I do need an assistant, actually. I have been turning down work because I cannot handle all of it alone. And yes, I feel for your situation, but I would not offer you a job if I did not think you could do it. You hauled ore in the mine. You are strong and you do not quit even when things get bad. Those are exactly the qualities I need." Vasha studied him with those unsettling amber eyes. "People will talk. A human stonemason working with an orc. It will be bad for your reputation. Let them talk. I care more about doing good work than about what small-minded people think." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on the table, clearly turning the offer over in her mind. "How much would you pay?" she asked finally. "Standard assistant's wage, plus room and board if you want it, or just meals if you would rather camp." "Standard wage is not what orcs usually get paid. You would be working for me, not for the mine owners. I pay fair wages for fair work." Another long silence. Then, "All right, I will work for you, but if people give you trouble because of me, I leave. I will not be the reason you lose contracts or business." "Fair enough," Callan said and extended his hand. After a moment, Vasha took it. Her grip was strong, her palm warm against his. They shook once, sealing the agreement. That was how Vasha came to work as Callan's assistant, though neither of them expected it to last beyond the autumn. The first week was awkward. Vasha was skilled at heavy lifting but knew nothing about stonemasonry, so Callan had to teach her everything from basic terminology to how to rid a level. She learned quickly, though, watching him work and asking questions when she did not understand something. Her strength was remarkable. She could move stones that would have required 2 or 3 men, making the work progress much faster than Callan had managed alone. They were building a foundation for a farmhouse belonging to a man named Thomas Yardley, and Yardley was not happy about the orc presence on his property. He complained constantly, questioned every decision Callan made, and found excuses to keep Vasha away from his wife and children as though she might attack them at any moment. Callan bore it all with gritted teeth, focusing on the work and ignoring the casual bigotry. Vasha said nothing about Yardley's treatment, but Callan noticed she made herself scarce whenever the farmer came around, disappearing to fetch more materials or check measurements. She was trying to make herself invisible, to give people no reason to complain about her. It made Callan angry in a way he did not fully understand. On the 8th day, Yardley pushed too far. He started questioning why Callan had hired that creature in the first place, suggesting loudly that orcs were lazy and stupid and probably could not be trusted with real work. Vasha was within earshot, carefully shaping a stone with hammer and chisel. Her hands did not falter, but Callan saw the way her jaw tightened. "Mr. Yardley," Callan said, setting down his tools with deliberate care. "Vasha is a better assistant than the last 3 humans I hired. She works hard, she learns fast, and she does not waste my time with complaints. If you have a problem with her presence, you are welcome to find another stonemason. There are 2 others in the region. Both of them have waiting lists 6 months long, and both of them charge more than I do." "Your choice." Yardley blustered and fumed, but ultimately backed down. He needed the foundation finished before winter, and he knew it. After that confrontation, he left them alone to work in peace. That evening, as they packed up tools for the day, Vasha said quietly, "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. You are my assistant and you deserve to be treated with respect. Most humans would not see it that way." "Then most humans are fools." The corner of Vasha's mouth twitched, not quite a smile but close. It was the first time Callan had seen her expression soften even slightly. The weeks passed, and they fell into a rhythm. Callan taught and Vasha learned. They worked from dawn until dusk, breaking for meals that they often ate sitting on the foundation stones of whatever they were building, watching the sun move across the sky. They did not talk much, but the silence between them was comfortable, the silence of 2 people who understood their work and trusted each other to do it well. Callan found himself noticing small things about Vasha. The way she always checked her tools twice before starting a task. The soft, almost musical way she hummed sometimes while working, a melody unlike any human song. The fact that she was always the first to arrive at the work site and the last to leave. She had a work ethic that would have shamed most of the men Callan knew. He also noticed that she was always slightly tense when they were in town or around other people, but relaxed considerably when they were alone or far from civilization. She smiled more in those times, laughed at his terrible jokes, occasionally shared stories about growing up in an orc clan before she left to find work in human lands. "Why did you leave your clan?" Callan asked one afternoon as they hauled stones for the Pike Creek Bridge repair. Vasha was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then, "I did not fit there. Orcs value strength and combat prowess above all. I was strong enough, but I never wanted to raid or fight. I wanted to build things, to create instead of destroy. My clan saw that as weakness. When I was old enough, I left. That must have been hard. It was necessary. I am not welcome there anymore, but I am also not what they tried to make me. I call that a fair trade." Callan thought about that as they worked. Vasha had given up her entire culture, her family, her people. because she did not fit their expectations. And in coming to human lands, she had found only more rejection, different but just as painful. Yet she kept going, kept working, kept trying to make a place for herself in a world that did not want her. "For what it is worth," he said, "I am glad you are here." Vasha looked at him with surprise, then ducked her head so her hair fell forward, hiding her face. But he thought he saw a flush of darker green across her cheeks. Autumn deepened, and the work continued. They finished the Yardley foundation, built 2 more house foundations for families who were less openly hostile if not exactly welcoming, and completed the bridge repair. Callan started teaching Vasha more advanced techniques, showing her how to cut and dress stone for decorative work, how to carve reliefs, how to read the grain of rock to know where it would split cleanly. She absorbed it all with focused intensity, practicing in her spare time until her hands were as calloused as his. One evening in mid-autumn, they were working late to finish a particularly tricky cornerstone. The sun had set, and they were working by lantern light, both tired but determined to complete the task. Vasha was holding a stone steady while Callan made fine adjustments with his hammer and chisel. He was concentrating so hard on getting the angle exactly right that he did not notice when the chisel slipped. The tool gouged into his thumb, drawing immediate blood. "Damn," he said, dropping the chisel and pressing his other hand against the wound. Vasha immediately grabbed his wrist, pulling his hand toward the lantern light to examine the injury. "How deep is it?" she asked. "Not too bad. Just a cut." She was already tearing a strip from her shirt hem to make a bandage. Her hands on his were gentle but firm, wrapping the cloth around his thumb, tying it snugly. "You need to be more careful," she said. "I know, I got distracted." "By what?" Callan could not very well say he had been distracted by her presence, by the way the lantern light brought out copper tones in her dark hair, by the focused expression on her face as she worked. So he just shrugged. "Tired, I suppose." Vasha did not look convinced, but she did not push. "We should stop for the night. You cannot work with an injured hand." They packed up tools and walked back to Callan's house together, as had become their routine. Vasha had accepted his offer of room and board after the first week, sleeping in the small third room that Callan had been using for storage. She kept her space meticulously neat, her few possessions organized and cared for. She contributed to the household in small ways, cooking meals sometimes, chopping firewood, mending torn clothes. It was beginning to feel less like employer and employee and more like partnership, though Callan tried not to examine that thought too closely. They ate dinner together, a stew that Vasha had prepared that morning before work. She was a better cook than Callan, having learned to make decent meals from limited ingredients during her years of traveling. Afterward, as was becoming their habit, they sat by the fire and talked about the next day's work. "The Brennan contract starts tomorrow," Callan said. "Foundation and first 2 courses of stone for a barn. Big project, probably a month of work. Will the Brennans have a problem with me?" "I already talked to them about you. They are fine with it." "You told them I am an orc." "I told them I have an excellent assistant who happens to be an orc, and if they have a problem with that, I would not take the contract. They chose to have no problem." Vasha shook her head slowly. "You are strange for a human. Because I treat people decently. Because you do not seem to see the things you are supposed to see. When you look at me, what do you see?" It was the most direct personal question she had ever asked him. Callan thought carefully before answering. "I see someone who works hard and learns fast. Someone who saved people when she could have saved herself. Someone who is skilled with her hands and patient with difficult tasks. Someone who makes good stew." He paused. "I see Vasha." She was staring at him with an expression he could not read. The firelight painted shadows across her face, highlighting the strong line of her jaw, the curve of her tusks, the unusual beauty of her features that was nothing like human beauty but striking nonetheless. "You really do not care that I am an orc," she said quietly. "I care that you are a good person and a skilled worker. The rest is just details." Vasha stood abruptly and moved to the window, looking out into the dark forest. Her shoulders were tense. "You should care," she said. "It would be easier for you if you did." Callan rose and joined her at the window, careful to keep a respectful distance. "Easier is not always better. People are going to notice that you keep me close. They are going to talk. The things they will say will not be kind. Let them talk, Callan." She turned to face him and her eyes were fierce. "I am not human. There are lines that should not be crossed, boundaries that exist for good reason. If people think there is something more than work between us, they will make your life difficult. Is there something more than work between us?" He asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them. Vasha looked stricken, like he had said something forbidden. "I should not have said anything," she said finally. "I am sorry. I will finish out the Brennan contract and then move on." "I do not want you to move on." "Callan, I am not good at reading people, Vasha. I work with stone because it is honest and straightforward, but even I can feel that something has changed between us over these past months. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am seeing what I want to see. But if there is even a chance that you feel what I feel, then I need to know before you disappear." Vasha closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was pain there, but also something else, something that looked like longing. "What you feel will not change what we are," she said. "I am an orc. You are a human. That is all we can ever be." "Why?" "Because the world does not allow for anything else. The world has been wrong about many things. Maybe it is wrong about this too." She shook her head, but it was a gesture of despair rather than disagreement. "Even if we both wanted this, where would we go? What kind of life could we have? Humans would never accept it. My own kind would see me as even more of a traitor. We would be alone wherever we went." Callan reached out slowly and took her hand, the one without the bandage. She did not pull away. "We are already alone," he said. "You have no clan and I have no family. The only difference is whether we are alone together or alone separately." "That is not a small difference." "No," he agreed. "It is not." They stood like that for a long moment, hands joined, the fire crackling behind them. Then Vasha gently pulled her hand free and stepped back. "I need time to think," she said. "This is not a small decision. Take all the time you need, but do not run away because you are scared. Promise me that." She met his eyes for a long moment, then nodded once. "I promise." The next few days were strange and tense. They worked on the Brennan Barn foundation together as professionally as always, but there was an awareness between them now, a consciousness of every accidental touch, every shared glance. Callan caught himself watching Vasha when she was not looking, memorizing the way she moved, the strength in her arms as she lifted stone, the concentration on her face when she measured and marked. At night they were careful around each other, polite and distant. Vasha spent more time in her room. Callan found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake by speaking honestly. On the fourth night, Vasha came to find him after dinner. He was sitting by the fire, pretending to read a book on architectural design that he had read 3 times already. She sat down in the other chair and folded her hands in her lap. "I have been thinking," she said. Callan set the book aside. "All right. About what you said, about being alone together instead of alone separately." His heart was beating too fast. "Yes. I want things I should not want," Vasha said quietly. "I want to stay here. I want to keep working with you. I want to build things and learn from you and sit by this fire at night talking about stone and work and nothing in particular. I want all of that even though I know it is dangerous. Dangerous how? Because the more I have, the more I will hurt when it is taken away. And it will be taken away, Callan. Eventually, people will make it impossible for us to work together. Or you will meet a human woman and realize that is what you actually want. Or my past will catch up with me and I will have to leave. Something will happen. It always does. Callan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You are right that we cannot control what other people do or what might happen in the future, but we can control what we choose right now. And I choose this. I choose you for however long we have. Even knowing how difficult it will be, even knowing that. Vasha looked at him with those amber eyes that had always seemed so alien and now seemed so familiar. I do not know how to do this, she said. My kind do not court the way humans do. I do not know what you expect from me. I expect honesty and trust, the same things you have already given me. Everything else we can figure out as we go. A small smile touched her lips. You make it sound simple. I am a simple man. I work with stone and I value loyalty and I say what I mean. Maybe that is not romantic, but it is honest. I think it is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me, Vasha said softly. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the tension that had hung between them for days finally easing. Whatever they were becoming, they would become together. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Callan's life. He and Vasha continued working on the barn foundation, and their partnership evolved in subtle ways. They moved around each other with increasing familiarity, anticipating what the other needed, communicating as much through gesture and glance as through words. The work was good and satisfying, the foundation taking shape exactly as planned. In the evenings they talked more freely, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing everything from philosophy to favorite foods. Callan learned that Vasha loved thunderstorms and hated winter cold. That she could speak 3 languages, including an orc tongue that sounded like gravel and song mixed together. That she had once wanted to be a sculptor, but never had the opportunity to learn properly. I could teach you, Callan offered. Stone carving is not that different from masonry in many ways. Her face lit up with genuine joy. You would teach me that. Of course. You have the hands for it and the patience. Those are the 2 most important things. So they added carving lessons to their routine. After dinner, Callan would bring out pieces of soft stone and show Vasha basic techniques. How to visualize the shape within the stone, how to remove material gradually, how to use different tools for different effects. She took to it naturally, her strong hands developing surprising delicacy when needed. The first thing she carved was a simple bird, wings spread in flight. It was crude but showed promise. Callan watched her work with the patient focus of a teacher and the admiration of someone who was beginning to realize he was falling in love. The realization came on him gradually, then all at once. He was in love with Vasha, not despite what she was, but because of who she was. Her strength, her resilience, her quiet dignity in the face of constant prejudice. The way she laughed at his jokes and corrected his mistakes and pushed him to be better at his craft. The way she looked in the morning with sleep still in her eyes, or in the evening with stone dust in her hair. All of it, he did not say the words yet. It felt too soon, too fragile. But he thought she might be feeling the same way based on the way she had started sitting closer to him by the fire, the way she sometimes touched his arm when making a point, the way she looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention. They were building towards something, he and Vasha. Something that would require more courage than either of them had shown so far. The first real test came in late autumn, when Callan had to go into town for supplies. Vasha usually stayed at the worksite during these trips, but this time they needed to discuss the next project with a potential client who had a shop in town. Callan wanted Vasha there because she would be doing a significant portion of the work. "Are you sure?" Vasha asked when he suggested it. "People in town barely tolerate me when I pass through quickly. Actually, sitting down to do business might be too much." The client is Marcus Brennan, Thomas's brother. He saw the work we did on Thomas's barn and was impressed. He specifically asked for both of us. That was true, though Marcus had seemed nervous when mentioning Vasha, like he was not sure if having an orc assistant was good or bad. But he wanted quality work more than he wanted to indulge his prejudices, which made him better than most. They rode into town together on the supply wagon, Callan handling the reins while Vasha sat beside him. The town was small, just a main street with shops and houses clustered around a central square. People stopped and stared as they passed. Some looks were merely curious, others openly hostile. Callan ignored them all and drove straight to Marcus Brennan's carpentry shop. Marcus was a stocky man in his 40s with sawdust perpetually in his beard. He greeted Callan warmly and nodded respectfully to Vasha, which was more courtesy than most bothered with. They went inside to discuss the project, a large workspace addition to the carpentry shop, including a stone foundation, partial stone walls, and several built-in features. The meeting went well. Marcus asked intelligent questions and seemed satisfied with Callan's proposed timeline and cost. They were just finalizing details when the door banged open and 3 men walked in. Callan recognized 2 of them as miners who had been pulled from the collapsed tunnel, men whose lives Vasha had helped save. "Marcus, what are you doing?" one of them demanded. "You are really going to hire this orc to work on your shop?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Callan is the best stonemason in the region, and I want the best for my business. He can do the work without bringing that thing into town." "That thing has a name," Callan said, his voice hard. "And she saved your life, Thomas Reed. Or have you forgotten being trapped underground?" Thomas Reed's face darkened. "I never asked for her help. You were unconscious. She helped anyway. You could try being grateful." "I am not going to be grateful to an orc. Her kind killed my brother in a raid 5 years ago." Vasha stood slowly. "I am sorry for your loss," she said quietly, "but I am not part of any clan. I have never raided human lands. You are all the same, monsters pretending to be civilized." Callan stood as well, moving slightly in front of Vasha. "Get out. This is not your shop, Zimmerman. No, but you are insulting my assistant and my friend, so I am asking you one more time to leave before this gets ugly." The 3 miners looked like they wanted to press the confrontation, but something in Callan's expression gave them pause. He was not a large man, but he had a stonemason's strength, arms and shoulders built from years of heavy labor. And more importantly, he looked genuinely angry in a way that suggested he would back up his words with action if necessary. They left, muttering threats and slurs, slamming the door behind them. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I apologize for that. Thomas has been angry since the mine collapse. He is looking for someone to blame. He can be angry without being cruel," Callan said. "Do you still want to hire us for the job?" Marcus looked at Vasha, then at Callan. "The townspeople are not going to like seeing an orc working here every day." "I know. That is why I am asking if you still want to hire us." There was a long pause, then Marcus nodded. "Yes, I want quality work and I think you 2 can deliver it. I do not care what the gossips say." "Then we have a deal," Callan said. They finalized the contract and left the shop. The confrontation had drawn attention, and people watched them walk back to the wagon with undisguised hostility. Callan helped Vasha up onto the seat, then climbed up himself and took the reins. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly as they drove out of town. "I am used to it." "That is not what I asked." Vasha was silent for a moment. "No," she said finally. "I am not all right. I saved that man's life and he looked at me like I was something to be scraped off his boot. I am tired, Callan. I am tired of being hated for things I have not done." He wanted to put his arm around her to offer physical comfort, but they were in public and that would only make things worse. So instead he said, "I know. I am sorry. You deserve so much better than this. We should end the contract with Marcus. Having me there will cause problems for him and for you." "No, Callan, no. We are not running away because some ignorant men cannot see past their own prejudice. We made a commitment and we are going to honor it. Let them gossip. Let them glare. We will do excellent work, and that will speak louder than their hatred." Vasha looked at him with something that might have been wonder. "Why are you willing to fight for me like this?" The answer was obvious to Callan, though saying it aloud felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I am in love with you, Vasha, and I am tired of pretending I am not." She drew in a sharp breath. For a moment he thought she would pull away, would retreat behind her walls. Then she reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. Her grip was tight, almost desperate. "I love you too," she said quietly. "I have for weeks now. I was just too afraid to say it." They drove the rest of the way home in silence. But it was the silence of two people who had finally found the courage to speak a truth they had both been carrying alone. That evening they sat by the fire as usual, but everything felt different now that the words had been said aloud. Callan kept glancing at Vasha, still hardly believing that she loved him back, that this impossible thing was actually happening. She caught him looking and smiled, a real smile that showed her tusks and made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Whatever we want, I suppose. There is no rule book for this. Your people will not accept it. Some will not. Others might surprise us, but ultimately I do not care what they think. I care what you think. I care what we think. If we believe this is right, then it is right." Vasha reached out and touched his face, her hand warm against his cheek. "You are the best person I have ever known," she said softly. He turned his head and kissed her palm, feeling her shiver at the contact. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her properly. Her lips were softer than he expected, warm and yielding. She made a small sound and kissed him back, her hand sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Vasha's eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed darker green. "That was my first kiss," she said. "Mine too. With anyone who matters, I mean. There were a few when I was younger, but they were not like that." She laughed, the sound bright and surprised. "We are both terrible at this, then. I suppose we will have to practice." They spent the rest of the evening practicing, stealing kisses between conversations, learning each other's boundaries and preferences. It was sweet and awkward and perfect. When they finally said good night and retreated to their separate rooms, Callan lay awake for hours, still feeling the ghost of her lips against his, still hardly believing his good fortune. The work on Marcus Brennan's shop edition began the following week. As predicted, it drew attention and most of it was negative. People found excuses to walk past the construction site, to mutter comments just loud enough to be heard, to make their disapproval clear. Callan and Vasha ignored it all, focusing on their work with professional detachment. The foundation went up quickly with both of them working together. Then they began on the partial walls, using a combination of cut stone and mortar work that would be both decorative and functional. Vasha's skills had improved remarkably over the months they had worked together. and now she could handle most tasks with minimal supervision. Marcus seemed satisfied with the progress, though Callan noticed the carpenter fielding questions and complaints from neighbors. To his credit, Marcus defended his decision to hire them, pointing out that the work was excellent and that was all that mattered to him as a businessman. It was exhausting, being constantly scrutinized and judged, but at least they had each other. In the evenings, they would return to Callan's house and shed the weight of other people's opinions like shedding dirty work clothes. There they could be simply themselves, two people in love learning how to build a life together. The first snow fell in early winter, coming earlier than expected. Callan woke to find the world transformed, everything buried under 6 inches of white. He got the fire going and was making breakfast when Vasha emerged from her room, looking sleepy and soft. "It snowed," he said unnecessarily. She came to look out the window, standing close enough that he could feel her warmth. "We will not be able to work on the Brennan project in this weather. No, the mortar would not set properly. We will have to wait for a thaw." Vasha turned to look at him. "What will we do in the meantime?" "I have some indoor projects, carved panels for the Yardley house, some decorative work I promised to a merchant family, things we can do in the workshop." "I would like that." They spent the next several weeks working in the small stone workshop Callan had built behind the house. It was cold even with a fire burning in the corner, and they worked bundled in layers, their breath steaming in the air. But the work was satisfying, the kind of detailed craftsmanship that required focus and skill. Callan showed Vasha how to carve decorative reliefs, teaching her to read designs and translate them into stone. She was a natural sculptor, her hands finding the right balance between force and finesse. Together, they created panels showing nature scenes, forests and rivers and mountains that would be installed in the Yardley entryway. The close work meant they were often near each other, sometimes working on the same piece, their hands moving in tandem. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with trust and partnership. They had found a rhythm together, a way of moving and working that felt natural and right. At night they sat closer together by the fire now, sometimes reading, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Vasha had started sleeping in Callan's room, nothing improper but simply sharing warmth on the coldest nights. They would lie together in the dark, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her, talking quietly until sleep took them. "Tell me about your family," Vasha said one night. Callan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "There is not much to tell. My father was a farmer who died when I was young. My mother remarried a stonemason, and that is how I learned the trade. When I was old enough, I left to find my own way. I have not spoken to them in years. You miss them, sometimes, but we were never very close. My stepfather taught me skills, but not much else. I was always more useful than loved, if that makes sense." Vasha's arms tightened around him. "I understand that feeling. What about you? Tell me about your clan." "We were warriors, mostly. Raiders." That is how many orc clans survive, taking what they need from human settlements. I hated it even as a child. All the killing, all the anger. When I was old enough to understand what we were doing, I started refusing to participate in raids. That made me an outcast. Better to be an outcast than a murderer, though. That took courage or stubbornness. I am still not sure which. They lay in comfortable silence after that, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the other room. Callan thought about their parallel histories, both of them cast out or estranged from their families, both finding their way alone in a world that did not make space for them easily. Maybe that was part of why they fit together so well. They both understood loneliness and the hunger for connection. "Vasha," he said quietly. Yes. When spring comes and the Brennan project is finished, I want you to stay, not as my assistant, as my partner, in the business and in life. I know that is complicated and people will make it difficult, but I do not care anymore. I want to build a life with you. She was silent for so long he worried he had overstepped. Then she shifted to look at him in the darkness, her eyes catching the faint light from the other room. Are you asking me to marry you? His heart stuttered. He had not quite framed it that way in his mind, but yes, essentially that was what he was asking. Would you want that? Would an orc woman even consider marrying a human man? Orcs do not marry the way humans do. We have bonding ceremonies, but they are different. Simpler in some ways, more permanent in others. Tell me about them. Two people exchange oaths before witnesses, promising to stand together against the world. They bind their hands with cord and speak their promises aloud. Then the cord is burned and the ashes scattered, symbolizing that the bond is now part of both of them, inseparable. That is all. That sounds beautiful. We do not have witnesses, it is just us. Then we will be our own witnesses. Vasha, I want to bind my life to yours in whatever way you will accept. Human marriage or orc bonding or something we create ourselves. I just want to be yours and I want you to be mine. She kissed him then, deep and thorough, her hands cradling his face. When she pulled back, her voice was thick with emotion. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. I want to build a life with you too, Callan Zimmerman. They held each other in the darkness. Two people who had found in each other what they had been searching for all their lives. Acceptance, partnership, home. Winter deepened and the world outside became harsh and unforgiving. But inside Callan's stone house, there was warmth and love and the quiet joy of shared purpose. They worked on their projects, made plans for spring, talked about the future they would build together. Vasha suggested they expand the workshop, maybe take on larger commission pieces. Callan talked about buying land and building a proper house, something with space for a real studio where Vasha could develop her sculpture work. They were making plans as though the world would let them, as though their love was not taboo and forbidden. And maybe that was naive, but they chose hope anyway. The thaw came in late winter, earlier than expected. Marcus Brennan sent word that he was ready for them to resume work on the shop addition. Callan and Vasha returned to town, ready to face whatever judgment awaited them there. The atmosphere had shifted during their absence. Marcus greeted them with the news that several other townspeople had seen the quality of the foundation and walls, and despite their misgivings about Vasha, they were interested in potentially hiring Callan for their own projects. It was not acceptance, exactly, but it was pragmatic acknowledgement of skill. They worked through the warming days of early spring, completing the shop addition to Marcus's satisfaction and beyond. The final product was beautiful, the stone walls perfectly plumb and mortared, the built-in features functional and elegant. Marcus paid them in full and immediately began referring them to others. Not everyone was willing to look past Vasha's orcish heritage, but enough where that work continued to come in. Slowly, grudgingly, the town was getting used to seeing them together. Some people remained hostile, but others began to soften, particularly after Vasha helped rescue a child who had fallen through thin ice on the river. She had been passing by when it happened and had not hesitated, plunging into the freezing water and pulling the boy to safety before anyone else could react. The child's mother thanked her with tears streaming down her face, and after that a few more doors opened. Not many, but a few. It was progress, however small. Spring fully arrived and with it came new growth and new opportunities. Callan and Vasha completed several more projects, their reputation for quality work spreading beyond the immediate area. They saved money, made plans, and began looking for land where they could build their own home. One evening in mid-spring, after a long day of work, Callan brought out a length of soft leather cord. "I have been thinking about what you said, about orc bonding ceremonies." Vasha looked at the cord, then at him, her expression unreadable. "You want to do that? Truly? I want to bind myself to you in the way your people recognize. I know it will not be official by human standards, but it will be real to us. That is what matters." Her eyes were suspiciously bright. "You would do that for me. I would do it with you. For both of us." They stood together in the fading light, facing each other. Vasha took one end of the cord and Callan took the other. They wrapped it around their joined hands, binding them together wrist to wrist. "I promise to stand with you against the world," Vasha said, her voice steady and clear. "I promise to be your partner in work and in life. I promise to be honest and loyal and to choose you every day for as long as we both live." Callan echoed her words, meaning every syllable. "I promise to stand with you against the world. I promise to be your partner in work and in life. I promise to be honest and loyal and to choose you every day for as long as we both live." They untied the cord and Callan built up the fire. Together they fed the cord to the flames and watched it burn, the ashes scattering on the evening breeze. When the last ember had died, Vasha kissed him with a fierceness that took his breath away. "We are bonded now," she said. "In the eyes of my people, you are my mate and I am yours." "In the eyes of any people that matter," Callan corrected gently. They made love that night for the first time, a tender and sometimes awkward exploration of each other's bodies, learning what brought pleasure and what brought laughter. It was imperfect and sweet, and everything Callan had ever wanted. The next morning they woke tangled together and planned their future over breakfast. They would buy land in the spring, build a house and proper workshop over the summer, expand their business to include both masonry and sculpture. They would create a space where they could work and live together, where maybe, eventually, other misfits and outcasts might find work and acceptance. It was an ambitious dream, but they had both learned that the impossible was sometimes just difficult in disguise. They found their land a month later, 20 acres at the edge of the frontier, far enough from town to offer privacy but close enough to remain accessible for work. There was a small stream running through the property and good stone deposits for quarrying. It was perfect. Callan began designing their house immediately, planning every detail with Vasha's input. It would be larger than his current house, with separate rooms for living and working, high windows for natural light, a proper fireplace in every room. They would build it themselves, of course, just the two of them working stone by stone until their vision became reality. The foundation went down in late spring. Callan marked the corners with stakes and string, checking and rechecking his measurements until everything was perfectly square. Then they began excavating, removing earth down to bedrock, creating a solid base that would support their home for generations. It was hard work, maybe the hardest either of them had done, but it was joyful too. They were building their future with their own hands, creating something that was entirely theirs. Every stone they set, every timber they raised, was an act of defiance against a world that said they should not exist, should not love, should not thrive. People from town would sometimes ride out to watch them work, curious about the house rising on the frontier property. Some came with criticism or warnings about the dangers of living so far from civilization. Others came with genuine interest, asking questions about the construction techniques, admiring the craftsmanship. Thomas Yardley came one afternoon, the farmer whose foundation they had built months before. He watched them work in silence for several minutes before finally speaking. "I was wrong about you," he said to Vasha. I judged you before I knew you. That was unjust. Vasha set down her tools and faced him. Thank you for saying so. My daughter is getting married next spring. She saw the carved panels you did for my house and wants to know if you would be willing to create something similar for her new home. We would be happy to discuss it with her, Callan said. Yardley nodded and left without further conversation, but the visit meant more than he probably realized. It was acknowledgement, however grudging, that Vasha belonged here as much as anyone. The house progressed through summer and into autumn. Walls rose, the roof went on, windows were installed. Inside, they created spaces that reflected who they were. A large workshop with northern light for Vasha's sculpture work, a library corner for Callan's growing collection of design books, a kitchen large enough for 2 people to work together, a bedroom that faced east to catch the morning sun. By the time the first snow fell, the house was complete enough to move into even if some interior work remained. They moved their belongings from Callan's old house, christened each room with laughter and love, and settled into their new life together. Winter arrived hard and fast, bringing storms that piled snow hip-deep around their property. They were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they had prepared well with stored food and plenty of firewood. The isolation was actually welcome after the scrutiny they had faced in town. Here, in their stone house surrounded by winter forest, they could simply be themselves without judgment or fear. Callan taught Vasha more advanced carving techniques, and she taught him orc songs in her native language. They worked on commission pieces in the workshop, read aloud to each other by firelight, made love and made plans and made each other laugh. It was a quiet happiness, the kind built from small domestic moments rather than grand gestures. One evening deep in winter, Vasha said, "I am pregnant." Callan nearly dropped the wood he was carrying. "You are what?" "Pregnant, with child. I am fairly certain the signs are all there." He set down the wood carefully and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, excited, uncertain. We did not plan this." "No, but that does not mean it is unwelcome, is it?" "Unwelcome." Vasha shook her head slowly. "No, I think I want this. I think I want a family with you, even though it terrifies me." Callan pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We will figure it out together. Just like we have figured out everything else. People will say terrible things. About the child, I mean. About what it means to be half orc and half human. Then we will raise a child strong enough to face those things. A child who knows they are loved and wanted and precious." Vasha was crying now, her face buried against his shoulder. "I never thought I could have this," she said. "A home, a partner, a family. I thought those things were for other people, not for outcasts like me. You are not an outcast anymore. You are my bonded mate. You are the co-owner of a successful masonry business. You are a skilled sculptor and stonemason. You are loved. You belong here." She held him tighter, and he held her back, both of them processing the reality of the new life growing between them. The pregnancy progressed through winter and into spring. Vasha handled it with the same quiet strength she brought to everything, working in the workshop until her belly grew too large to comfortably reach the stone, then switching to design work and smaller detail carving. Callan fussed over her more than she liked, constantly worried about her health and comfort, but she tolerated his concern with patient amusement. They received their first major commission that spring, a memorial statue for the town cemetery, commemorating the miners who had died in the collapse. The commission came with a letter from the families, specifically requesting that Vasha be involved in the work since she had been there in the mine, had witnessed what happened, had saved lives that day. It felt like vindication, like recognition finally given. They worked on the piece together, pouring their hearts into creating something that would honor the dead while bringing comfort to the living. The statue showed a miner emerging from darkness into light, one hand extended as if helping others behind him to climb free. It was some of their best work, and when they installed it in the cemetery that summer, even the most prejudiced townspeople had to admit it was beautiful. The families thanked them with genuine warmth, and several explicitly thanked Vasha for her role in the rescue and for her artistry in creating the memorial. Vasha went into labor on a hot summer evening, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Callan rode for the midwife in town, his heart pounding with fear and excitement. The midwife was an older woman named Clara who had delivered half the babies in the region. She took one look at Vasha and got to work with calm efficiency. The labor was long and difficult. Orc pregnancies were apparently slightly different from human ones, and the midwife had to adjust her usual practices. But she was skilled and experienced, and when dawn broke, a baby's cry filled the stone house for the first time. "A girl," Clara announced, holding up the squirming infant. "Healthy lungs, all her fingers and toes, seems perfectly healthy." Callan approached cautiously, hardly daring to believe it was real. The baby was small and red-faced, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn amber like her mother's. She had tiny tusks just barely visible, small pointed ears, and skin that was somewhere between human pink and orc green, a color entirely her own. "She is perfect," Callan whispered. Vasha was exhausted, her hair plastered to her face with sweat, but she was smiling as Clara placed the baby in her arms. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "Welcome to the world." They named her Kira, an orc name meaning stone flower. She was indeed perfect, and in the days that followed, both Callan and Vasha fell completely in love with their daughter. She was demanding and loud and kept them awake at all hours, and they would not have changed a thing. The townspeople's reaction to Kira was mixed. Some saw her as an abomination, proof that humans and orcs should never mix. Others saw her as simply a baby, innocent and deserving of protection. And a few saw her as a symbol of possibility, proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. Marcus Brennan came to visit when Kira was a month old, bringing a carved wooden cradle he had made himself. "For the baby," he said gruffly. "Every child deserves a proper place to sleep." It was a gesture of acceptance, and Callan thanked him with genuine warmth. Others came too, bringing gifts or just curious to see the half-orc child. Vasha handled the attention with grace, though Callan knew it exhausted her. She was fiercely protective of Kira, ready to defend her daughter against any slight or insult. The years that followed were full and busy. Kira grew from infant to toddler to child, learning to walk in the workshop among stone dust and tools, learning to speak in both common tongue and the orc language her mother taught her. She was bright and curious, with her mother's strength and her father's patience. The business continued to grow. Word of their work spread beyond the local region, and they began receiving commissions from farther away. They hired 2 assistants, both young people who did not care about Vasha's heritage and just wanted to learn the craft. The workshop expanded, the business thrived, and slowly, grudgingly, the world made room for them. It was not perfect. There were still people who refused to work with them, who crossed the street to avoid Vasha, who muttered slurs when they thought no one was listening. But there were also people who judged them only on their work, who became friends, who treated them with basic human decency. On Kira's 5th birthday, they held a party at their house. A dozen people came, townspeople, clients, friends they had made over the years. Children played in the yard while adults talked and ate. It was normal and domestic, and everything Callan had dreamed of back when he first pulled Vasha from the collapsed mine. That evening, after everyone had left and Kira was asleep, Callan and Vasha sat on their porch watching the sun set over the frontier forest. Vasha leaned against him, her hand in his, both of them tired but content. "You ever think about that day in the mine?" Vasha asked quietly. "Sometimes. It feels like a lifetime ago and like yesterday all at once. I was certain I was going to die down there. I had accepted it. Then you appeared with your lantern and your promises, and you changed everything." Callan kissed the top of her head. "You changed everything for me too. I was just going through the motions before you, working, existing, but not really living. You taught me what it means to build a life instead of just enduring one. We built it together. Yes, together." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one. Behind them, in the stone house they had built with their own hands, their daughter slept safely. Around them, the frontier wilderness teemed with life. Ahead of them stretched years of shared work and shared love, challenges they would face together and joys they would create together. It was not the life either of them had imagined for themselves. It was better. The tunnel had collapsed on 14 miners all those years ago, and Callan had pulled them out one by one, saving the orc girl for last, because she insisted on helping others first. He had gone back for her when others would have left her to die. That choice, that moment of seeing her as a person rather than a monster, had set them both on a path neither could have predicted. Now they were here, bonded mates, business partners, parents, friends to those wise enough to look past the surface. They had built something beautiful from the rubble of that collapsed mine, not just a house or a business, but a life rich with love and purpose and belonging. "I would do it all again," Vasha said softly, as though reading his thoughts. "Every hardship, every insult, every moment of fear, it was all worth it to end up here with you." "I love you," Callan said, the words as true now as they had been that first time he spoke them, as true as they would be every day forward. "I love you too." And there on the porch of their stone house, surrounded by the life they had built together, Callan Zimmerman and Vasha sealed that promise with a kiss as the stars wheeled overhead and the future stretched bright before them. They had been told their love was impossible, their partnership forbidden, their family an abomination. They had proved all of it wrong through sheer stubborn devotion to each other and to the work they did together. Stone by stone, day by day, choice by choice, they had built not just walls and foundations but a marriage, a home, a legacy. The townspeople who had once muttered against them now brought their children to watch the stonemasons work, telling stories of the human and the orc who created the most beautiful buildings in the region. Young people from both human and orc communities occasionally appeared asking to learn the craft, drawn by the example of partnership that transcended old divisions. Kira grew up strong and proud, inheriting her mother's resilience and her father's steady heart. She learned stonemasonry from both parents, developed her own artistic style, and eventually took over more of the work as Callan and Vasha grew older. She was the first of what would become a bridge generation, half-orc, half-human children who grew up in a world slightly more accepting than the one their parents had known. But that was still years in the future. For now, on this perfect spring evening, Callan and Vasha were simply two people in love, watching the sun set over land they owned, a house they built, a life they chose. The tunnel collapse that had brought them together was just a memory now, something that had happened to different versions of themselves in what felt like another life. What mattered was this: the warmth of Vasha's hand in his, the sound of their daughter's soft breathing from inside the house, the solid stone walls that would shelter them through whatever came next. They had pulled each other from the darkness, again and again, in all the ways that mattered. and they would keep pulling each other toward the light, toward joy, toward the life they continued to build together one stone at a time, for all the years they had left to share. The stars brightened overhead as full dark arrived, and somewhere in the forest a night bird called its lonely song. But Callan and Vasha were not lonely, would never be lonely again. They had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had built the best of lives from that foundation. It was, by any measure, a happy ending, the kind earned through courage and choice, and the stubborn refusal to let the world dictate the shape of their love. And as they rose to go inside, to check on their sleeping daughter and bank the fires for the night, both of them knew with bone-deep certainty that they would do it all again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day forward. Building, creating, loving, choosing each other and the life they shared. That was the promise they had made in the darkness of a collapsed mine, to stand together against the world, and they had kept that promise every single day since, would keep it until their last breath and beyond. The stone house stood solid and strong under the stars, a monument to the impossible made real. And inside its walls, two people loved each other with the kind of devotion that reshapes the world, one small act of defiance at a time.